Hey performers, today we're going to talk about how to pull ourselves out of those mental ruts that we all get stuck in sometimes. Now, one of the hardest things about being stuck in one of those ruts is that kind of spiral attacks everything that we need to help pull ourselves out in the first place. It goes after motivation, it goes after energy levels, and when we're down like that, it can be so difficult to work our way back out. It's almost like some kind of autoimmune disease. You feel depressed and it's hard to get out of bed and it's hard to get motivated to do the things that you might even know you need to do to not feel depressed anymore. And that's how these cycles get started, and why sometimes people can stay in these ruts, in these non-clinically depressive cycles for 10, 20 years, even a lifetime. And once you start struggling with something like that, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the difficulty that you're having in one part of your life bleeds into all the other parts of your life, and it just gets harder and harder and harder. But luckily for us, there's a pattern that we can see so we can interrupt that cycle and get you back into your best self as quickly as possible. Now, there's one special thing that we can do once we've found ourselves in one of these vicious cycles that we can use to break that cycle right away and get yourself back to being the best possible version of yourself, singing those high notes on all the world's best stages. And that thing that we need to do is get better at perception, or more specifically, noticing the cognitive biases that low mood, that non-clinical depression really creates, so that we can work against it. I just want to take a moment and make it super clear that we're talking about non-clinical depression. If you find yourself in a spot where these things are not quite enough for you, please, please, please seek help. There's tons of great resources out there at low to no cost, but please use the resources that you have available to you. So at the very beginning, there's normally some kind of event. Something happens to throw your brain's threat levels through the roof, and that might be a kind of normal bad thing. There might be a breakup, some kind of loss of a loved one, maybe you had an audition that didn't go the way that you wanted it to, or you had a really difficult conversation with someone who you respected and they didn't follow through. It also might be something physical. Something happened to your body, like you got a disease that made you sick for a long time, and even though you're completely healed now, you're still stuck in that place. It might be a physical injury. You broke a bone. Maybe you were in a car accident. Something happened to your vestibular system, your inner ear, that ripples through the rest of your life. These are all really well studied and documented things that can actually turn into this non-clinical kind of low-grade depression type thing. Once you have that inciting incident, sometimes you'll just recover. That's probably happened to everyone who's watching. Something bad happened and you didn't end up in a depressive spiral. You recovered. Great. But if you don't recover from it, you can end up with this kind of non-clinical depression, and that's what the rest of this video is about. So the first thing that happens before we start to feel much of these symptoms of these low-grade depressive episodes is we have a cognitive bias. So we start seeing the world not as it actually is, but in a way that our brain is trying to insulate us from any more potential damage. So we're going to do a quick experiment to show you just how powerful your brain can be in seeing things that aren't there, and how it's doing it every second of every day. Down below and also on screen right now is a Troxler image. This is something that has colors all over the place, but I want you to just look very, very closely at the black plus sign that's right in the center of the image. Put both your eyes on it and you'll see there's colors all around. If you stare at it long enough, those colors will start to fade to have it all turn into that grayish purplish color. Pause now if you need to and give yourself 10, 20, 30 seconds to let those colors fade out into nothingness. Once you come back or you blink, you'll see that those colors came back because your brain now sees what's there. When you are in a place where you can pause, be still, and let your brain's threat level down, then your brain will go, okay, it's cool. I can just focus on what's in front of me, and I don't have to worry about filling up everything else that's there. Another great experiment that we can do is a blind spot test in your eyes. So close your left eye and put both your fingers out in front of you. What I want you to do is focus your right eye, the one that's open, on your left finger, and have your right finger right next door. Start moving your right finger to the side, and you'll notice that that finger sort of vanishes right about here. So right here, you can't see your finger. If you move it to the outside, you can see it again. If you move it to the inside, you can see it again. But as long as your right eye is focused on your left finger, you'll find you have a blind spot in your vision. So your eyes are always trying to fill in what's there, kind of like a chat GPT thing just for your eyes. So if you think you might be dealing with some of these cognitive biases, this is the first one to look out for. And it is a negative interpretation of ambiguous events. And like you may have heard me say before, that negative interpretation is a survival output because your brain knows that things only have to go wrong enough once and you die, but things can never go right enough that you live forever. So if you're a student who's still in school and you see a teacher in the hallway who you know came and saw your last performance, but they don't tell you how great of a job you did as they're walking by, our brain is automatically going to go to, they hated it, I'm terrible, this is awful. When in reality, that teacher might have a million other things going on through their mind. They've got papers to grade, they've got other students to attend to, and maybe you did just great, but they have other bigger fish to fry at the moment. It's an ambiguous event, but our brains can interpret it as negative. The second bias to look out for is a selection bias. So let's say someone's giving you feedback on a performance that you recently gave, and you get lots of positive things and lots of negative things and things to work on and improve on. Apart from the event, we can say, of course, that's always going to happen. We're never going to be perfect. But when we're in the moment, for dealing with this low-grade depression, this stuck in a rut sensation, it can be difficult to take both of those things, the positive and the negative feedback, as equal value. Instead, we focus so much on the negative feedback that we sometimes kind of forget positive stuff happened at all. If you are reading a review of a performance you recently gave, how much of it was positive and how much of it was negative? Don't read it yet. Just try to remember. Then if you can find it, maybe go back and reread it and see, were there positive things and were there negative things that they said? Hopefully, you'll find that the answer is yes, there were both. But in our minds, we only remember the negative. This is a selection bias. And the third cognitive bias to look out for is the natural progression of that selection bias. It's an overgeneralization towards the negative, especially in memory. That means you literally might not remember a positive bit of feedback that you got, or a positive feeling that you had after you finished a piece or a phrase the next day. Your memory is only going to remember the negative things. So if we take all three of those cognitive biases, the ambiguous becomes negative, the selection bias towards the negative, and the overgeneralization towards the negative, and we put them together, of course we're going to end up in these ruts, these downward spirals that just turn into greater and greater negativity. If we have something that happens in a day, we have one positive thing, we have one neutral thing, and we have one negative thing, we're going to completely forget the positive thing because we're only remembering the negative stuff, overgeneralization towards the negative. The ambiguous thing will turn into a negative thing inside your brain, and the thing that's a negative thing will get blown out of proportion. So that's why it becomes so common to have something go wrong and it feels like it bleeds into all the other areas of our lives because of these three cognitive biases. So once you've been in this downward spiral for long enough, those cognitive biases will come together and you will start saying things like, I suck, like I'm bad, like I don't deserve this. All of the imposter syndrome, all of those things that you may have heard come out of your own mouth. And that is the cornerstone of what's called a negative self-attribution. That means that you think you're bad and you think you don't deserve good things. And that's the root of where these ruts really come from. And that's when we start seeing ourselves as incredibly negative. And going all the way back up to the top, how do we start seeing ourselves that way? It's because the ambiguous stuff turns into negative stuff. It's because we can only see the negative stuff when it comes up, and we only remember the negative stuff in our past. That's when we start having hormones get messed up and neurotransmitters getting messed up, like serotonin and dopamine. Then there's things like your motivation goes out the window. Your energy level goes out the window. Those are probably the two most common ones, is motivation and energy. And also we can start having problems with inflammation and weight gain and difficulty losing weight. And sometimes people lose weight too quickly. There's a million different potential symptoms. Just keep your eyes peeled for them. But more importantly, keep your eyes peeled for what comes before. Those three cognitive biases. Ambiguous becomes negative, selection bias, you can only see the negative in the moment, and overgeneralization towards the negative, so you can only remember the negative that's happened in the past. Everything that we've talked about so far is very neuroanatomy, which is not what psychiatry wants to help with. We've got to remember that the core of this issue is a perception issue, and that happens inside of us, both here in our hearts, of course, but also in our brains and literally in our eyes. What I find so interesting is when you look at studies of people who are resilient, they receive negative feedback in literally a different way. Different parts of their brain light up, and they can interpret and perceive that information differently. So they say, cool, I got some negative feedback about something. It's not the end of the world. I'm going to take it, learn from it, and grow. From someone who's been dealing with those three cognitive biases, consciously or unconsciously, they literally receive that negative information and internalize it. And it's not about how well you can regulate your emotions sometimes, but it's literally about how your brain connects and you interpret your perception of the world. What's great about that is we can change that. We can do exercises to make sure you move in the right direction and get to the root of what's really going on very, very quickly. If you're one of those people who's currently dealing with those three cognitive biases, if you find yourself starting to struggle with that negative self-attitude, the best thing that you can do for yourself is to really make sure that you see the world around you as neutral or ambiguous. Remember that the way that someone treats you says way more about them and their mental state than it says about you and your value to the world. So sometimes I'm short-tempered and I can be mean. And I think we all have moments like that. So when someone is short or mean towards me, I try to remember the things that put me in that negative headspace, and maybe they are going through something similar. So the way that someone acts towards me probably has nothing to do with me. It's not because I made them angry, but maybe something happened at home. Maybe they just had to put their dog down and they're very short and angry about everything. I know I certainly would be. And this is one of the reasons why neuroscience really teaches empathy. If everyone had super low threat levels and had a strong understanding of what Rex is and how it interrupts their behavior, we would all be super happy and we wouldn't have anything to worry about. But that's not the case. So when someone acts towards you in an angry way, instead, try and figure out what's going on inside their brain that raised their threat level to the point where they felt the need to snap, or they felt the need to say a mean or rude comment toward you. And if you only take one thing away from this video, let it be the line that the way someone treats you says way more about them than it does about you. And the way that you treat you says a lot more about you than anything else in the world. If you want to take the shortcut towards training your perception, yes, start treating everything as neutral or ambiguous, but you can also go a step further and start rewiring your brain through visual system and even vagus nerve exercises. Check out all of the resources in the Triple Threat Athlete Crew Facebook page linked below for training your eyes and training your vagus nerve. That's the thing that has a lot to do with breathing, with gut, with mood, with digestion, everything that's so important for how you actually feel inside, so you can start feeling better about the rest of your life too.